Have you ever heard of someone dead for 3 minutes and coming back with a message that could shake the foundations of an entire nation? That's exactly what happened to Sophia Carter, a journalist who thought she'd seen it all until she didn't. Was it a warning or just a near-death illusion? Sophia Carter was always in a rush, not the casual, let's grab brunch kind of rush, but the frantic, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, missing deadlines like it's a competitive sport kind of rush. At 28, she was already a big name in Chicago's journalism circles. People called her the Truth Hunter, a title she pretended to hate but secretly loved. Her life was a whirlwind of flashing cameras, late-night edits, and debates that could put political analysts to shame. But ask her about heaven, angels, or anything remotely mystical. She'd laugh and call it fairy tales for bored minds. Sophia liked her truths hard and cold, facts she could research, double-check, and slap into an article. Yet, as she dashed out of her apartment one crisp November morning, sipping coffee that tasted like regret, she had no idea her world was about to flip upside down. The streets of Chicago were alive. Horns honked like they were part of some chaotic symphony. Street vendors called out their specials, and the ever-present wind teased at Sophia's unruly hair. She ducked into her favorite coffee shop, been there, done that, to fuel up before her first meeting. The barista greeted her with a smile. "Another late start, huh, Sophia?" She rolled her eyes, grabbing her triple-shot latte without missing a beat. Her day was packed tighter than a rush-hour train. Morning meetings with her editor about an upcoming piece on global politics, an afternoon interview with a controversial diplomat, and by evening, a panel discussion on national TV about the rising tensions in Eastern Europe. "What's next?" she muttered to herself. "Solving world hunger?" Sophia thrived on chaos, but even she was starting to feel the cracks. Deadlines weren't just looming, they were stomping on her heels. Her editor, Rachel, had been extra edgy lately, throwing phrases like exclusive coverage and breaking news at her, like darts. The topic of the hour? Political drama brewing in Eastern Europe. Leaders were throwing accusations back and forth like it was a tennis match, and everyone was watching to see who'd serve the final blow. "People are calling it the next Cold War," Rachel had said during their morning meeting, pushing a steaming cup of black coffee toward Sophia. "You're our best writer on this. Make it sing. No pressure, right? Just capture the brewing chaos of international relations in 800 words or less. Easy." As the day dragged on, the exhaustion hit. Sophia slumped at her desk, staring at her notes. Words blurred together. Dates, names, and quotes all jumbled in her head like a bad word search. Her phone buzzed. Another call, this time from her mom. "You working yourself to death again?" her mom asked, half joking. Sophia laughed, brushing it off. "Death doesn't scare me, Mom. Deadlines do." The night was unusually quiet for Chicago. Even the city's notorious late-night honks and shouts seemed to have taken a break. Sophia gripped the wheel of her ancient sedan, a trusty and rusty 2008 Honda Civic, with one hand while the other adjusted the volume on her radio. Smooth jazz filled the car, which could either relax you or lull you into missing a turn. For Sophia, it was neither. She was exhausted. A long day of chasing quotes and hammering out a politically charged article had drained every ounce of her energy. Now, don't get it twisted. Sophia's personality was neither cold nor warm. Her personality? Let's just say she was a little like the city she lived in. Tough, resilient, and a little rough around the edges. Small talk? Not her thing. She didn't have time for it. Deep, philosophical conversations about the afterlife or ghosts? Forget about it. She'd laugh and give you that look, the one that says, "Really?" and then go right back to talking about the latest piece she was working on. Despite her success, she was a walking contradiction. On the one hand, she was all about the hard facts, the ones you could see, touch, and prove with data. On the other, she was, well, let's just say a little skeptical when it came to things like mystical experiences. Ghosts, spirits, life after death. The idea of a world beyond what we can see didn't fit into her neatly ordered universe of deadlines and deadlines. There was no room for fairy tales in her life. She had enough real stories to keep her busy. She had grown up on stories that were just that, stories. Her grandmother used to tell her tales about spirits and angels, but they seemed as real as the tooth fairy. She'd smile and nod, humoring her grandmother because, well, she was grandma. But as soon as the visit was over, Sophia would roll her eyes and get back to the facts. To her, there was no mystery about the world. It was a place of concrete and steel, and the truth? It was written in black and white, not in the stars. Her colleagues thought she was a little obsessed, and maybe they were right. But obsession paid off. At 28, she had already made a name for herself in Chicago's journalism scene. She was everywhere, on TV, on social media, in all the major publications. If you needed a hard-hitting investigation, she was your girl. People loved the way she uncovered the stories that made other reporters squirm. Her non-stop routine to uncover the truth was both admired and feared. After all, if she was coming for your story, you'd better be ready. There were no secrets that could be hidden from Sophia Carter. Sophia's reputation did not just build on her work ethic. It was also built on her ability to stay one step ahead of everyone else. She had a knack for getting people to talk, a kind of quiet power. In interviews, she could sit there in silence, letting the tension grow until the person across from her couldn't stand it anymore. It was almost as if they needed to confess, and she was always ready with the follow-up question, the one that made them toss and turn. She could get the truth from anyone, no matter how tightly they clung to their secrets. But the truth is not always pretty. Sometimes it is ugly, uncomfortable, and inconvenient. And that's what Sophia had come to accept. After all, she wasn't in the business of writing fairy tales. She was in the business of unmasking lies and bringing the truth to light. She didn't care if it made people uncomfortable. If it was the truth, it needed to be said. That's what drove her, and it was exactly what had earned her the Truth Hunter nickname. Yet despite her success, there was something missing. Sophia didn't let people in. Not really. She was so used to living in a world of facts and cold logic that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to trust anyone, to believe in something beyond what could be seen and measured. Maybe it was the long hours or the endless string of interviews that kept her too busy to notice. Or maybe it was the endless pursuit of something that, deep down, she doubted even existed. But even with her accomplishments, there was a quiet sense of dissatisfaction. You could see it in her eyes sometimes, especially in the moments when she was not chasing a story. If you knew her well enough, you might catch the way her gaze would drift off, almost as if she was looking for something, maybe a hint of magic or something more than what she had. But then the phone would buzz or someone would knock on her door, and that would be the end of it. She would refocus and go back to doing what she did best, chasing down the truth. Sophia had everything anyone could want, a high-paying job, prestige, and an army of followers who hung on her every word. But deep down, there was a quiet part of her that wondered if maybe there was more to life than just chasing the facts. Maybe, just maybe, there was a bigger story waiting for her. One she couldn't see through the lens of a camera or a notebook, but for now she was content to stick with what she knew until something happened that would shatter everything she thought she knew. Sophia's life was always in overdrive, and she was driving at full speed ahead. It wasn't that she wanted to slow down. In fact, she liked the chaos, the rush of deadlines, the constant churning of stories, the sound of her laptop keys clicking away like a drumbeat. It was the life she had chosen, and it made her feel important, needed. She was one of the top reporters in Chicago. She had a knack for digging into stories, even the ones most people were too scared to touch. The relentless drive for success had slowly chipped away at the things she valued. The first toll it took was on her relationships. Sophia had always prided herself on being a professional first, everything else second. Friends, family, they came and went. As her career grew, so did the distance between her and the people who once meant everything to her. She'd miss birthday parties, family dinners, and important moments, all because of a breaking news alert or a story that couldn't wait. Her best friend Clara had once jokingly called her a professional ghost, always present but never really there. It did not remain funny anymore. Sophia tried to keep the balance. She'd schedule calls with her mom or text her dad, but the truth was they were mostly one-sided conversations. She'd promised to visit or catch up when she had time, but when never seemed to come. Every time she felt guilty about it, she'd push the thought aside. She had no time for guilt, no time for regrets. She was busy, and that was her excuse. It was a casual morning for Sophia. She was in a rush to reach at office as an exclusive meeting was waiting for her. It all happened in a split second. One moment, Sophia was speeding down Lakeshore Drive, her mind racing through the meeting minutes. She'd always prided herself on being able to juggle it all. Coffee in one hand, phone in the other, her thoughts zigzagging from story leads to meeting notes, all while navigating the city streets. But that morning, her mind was in 100 different places. She was running late, again, and there was no time to slow down. Sophia's thoughts drifted to the Eastern European tensions she'd been researching. Rumors of secret military deals and whispers about Viktor Sergei, a man some saw as a savior and others as a rising dictator. Lost in questions about his role in the unfolding chaos, she barely noticed the flashing red light ahead. The screech of tires jolted her back, but the truck, a speeding beast of steel, was already too close. She hit the brakes, but it was too late. The sound of metal crunching against metal was deafening. Her car spun like a soda can caught in a storm. Glass shattered into a million tiny daggers, and the world flipped, literally. The Civic landed upside down, its roof crumpled like a cheap soda can. Everything went black. The next few moments were a blur of flashing lights, a loud, frantic voice shouting orders, and the hum of a siren. But for Sophia, it was quieter than she'd ever known. In the silence, it felt like she was floating. She didn't feel the pain from the crash. She didn't feel anything. It was as if the world was miles away, and she was standing on the edge, watching it all from a distance. In truth, she was unconscious, her body crumpled in the wrecked car. Paramedics worked frantically to revive her. They'd later say that Sophia was clinically dead for 3 minutes. 3 minutes where her heart stopped, her breath was gone, and her body was nothing more than a lifeless shell. The scene of the accident was chaotic. Firefighters pried the door open, shouting to each other, trying to get Sophia out of the mangled car. Blood, a lot of blood. But none of that mattered to her at the time. She was no longer in that car. Sophia was in a place that didn't feel like a place at all. There was no pain, no fear of death. Just a sense of stillness, like standing in the middle of a vast ocean with no waves. Everything around her was a soft, infinite kind of darkness, but it didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. There was a strange sense of calm, almost as if the world itself had paused, holding its breath. In this space, she felt untethered, like she wasn't connected to anything. No career, no deadlines, no relationships, no time. It was as if she had slipped through some invisible door into another world. Her mind tried to process what was happening. Was she dead? Was this the other side? But there were no answers. Just that strange stillness. She couldn't move, but she didn't feel stuck either. It was like being suspended in a moment that didn't want to end. Back at the crash site, time was moving fast. Sophia's heart had stopped beating. The paramedics were doing everything they could. Compressions, adrenaline shots, all of it. But nothing was working. The sound of the machines flatlining was like a final toll. "She's gone," one of them said. It was not a whisper. It was as if they were confirming the inevitable. But then, just as quickly as the words left his mouth, her heart started again. A soft flutter at first, then a full beat. And in that beat, Sophia Carter came back. Her eyes opened in the ambulance just as the paramedic looked at the monitor and saw her pulse return. The silence broke, the hum of life returned. But for a few minutes, there was nothing. When Sophia came to, she was not sure if she was alive, dead, or somewhere in between. She could hear distant voices, urgent, panicked. "We've got a pulse," someone shouted. It sounded like it was coming from miles away through a thick wall of fog. Her chest felt like it was caved in, every breath a struggle. But then, slowly, even the pain began to fade. The voices grew fainter until they disappeared altogether. What replaced them was nothingness, silence, peace. Sophia opened her eyes, or at least she thought she did. She was not in the wreck anymore, not even in Chicago. She stood on a plane of shimmering light that seemed to stretch into infinity. The air wasn't air, not in the way we know it. It was thick but weightless, like standing inside a bubble made of sunlight. Colors swirled around her, shades she couldn't even name. hues that seemed alive. They danced and hummed softly, as though the universe itself was breathing. Sophia tried to speak, but no sound came out. Oddly, she didn't panic. The fear she should have felt was replaced by a strange calm, like every worry she'd ever carried had been lifted from her shoulders. Even the constant ache in her back from hunching over a laptop all day? Gone. She felt whole, and she was not thinking about deadlines, stories, or the next cup of coffee for the first time in years. The silence was comforting, but it didn't last. A soft glow appeared in the distance, growing brighter with each passing moment. Not blinding, though. It was warm and inviting. As the light approached, Sophia realized it was a presence. Not a person exactly, but something she instinctively knew was alive. It radiated kindness, wisdom, and something else: power. She didn't see a face or hear a voice, but somehow the presence spoke to her. Not with words, but with feelings that seeped straight into her heart. "You are safe," it seemed to say, "but you must see." Before she could ask what that meant, if she could ask, the space around her began to shift. The shimmering colors dimmed, replaced by flashes of something darker. She was not in the peaceful world anymore. Images flickered before her like scenes from a movie. A world in chaos. Smoke billowed from broken cities. Skies darkened with ash. She saw people running, their faces etched with fear. And then she saw him. A man with a cold, calculating gaze standing in the middle of the destruction. She didn't know his name yet, but something told her he was not just part of the chaos. He was the reason for it. The presence's warmth faded slightly, replaced by something heavier. Urgency, responsibility. She could feel it pressing down on her like an invisible weight. The voice returned, quieter now but still persistent. "You must see. You must know." Suddenly the images disappeared, and Sophia felt herself being pulled back. The shimmering colors reappeared, but now they seemed farther away. The peace she'd felt moments ago was slipping through her fingers. Her chest tightened as sound returned. Sharp, jarring sounds of machines beeping and voices shouting. Her body felt heavy, almost unbearable, as if someone had thrown a boulder onto her chest. Sophia struggled, her eyes snapping open to the blinding fluorescent lights of the hospital room. Pain rushed in like a tidal wave, a cruel reminder that she was still very much alive. But the peace, the colors, the voice, it didn't feel like a dream. She was certain it had happened. But what exactly had she seen? And why was she the one who had to see it? What was the message the presence wanted Sophia to carry? And who was the man in her vision, standing at the center? Before Sophia could process the flood of questions in her mind, the presence communicated, not with words, but with a wave of emotion that formed thoughts in her heart. "You must see what lies ahead. Humanity stands on the edge of a choice." The space around her shifted, warmth fading into the cold. Dark skies churned above as she stood on a cliff overlooking a ruined city. Buildings crumbled, rivers swallowed bridges, and the air felt heavy, burdened by the weight of countless screams and tears. Sophia felt the urgency. She was here for a reason. Her eyes darted to a distant coastline where massive waves crashed against what used to be skyscrapers. The waters weren't just high, they were angry, consuming everything in their path. She tried to look away, but the vision shifted before she could even blink. Now she saw streets filled with people, families, children, fleeing in terror as fire rained down from the sky. Soldiers marched through the chaos, their faces cold and unfeeling, like machines built for destruction. Sophia's breath caught, her heart pounded in her chest. She was recalling her memories. "Why are you showing me this?" She wanted to scream, but the presence was still there, watching, guiding. "You must see." And then she saw him. At first it was just a shadow in the destruction, but as the figure stepped closer, his features came into focus. A middle-aged man with sharp eyes that seemed to pierce through the chaos around him. His posture was almost unnervingly calm, as if the ruin didn't faze him. His suit was pristine, his movements deliberate. There was no mistaking it. He wasn't a bystander in this nightmare. He was at the center of it. The presence spoke again, and this time it felt heavier. "Victor Sergei," Sophia didn't know him personally, but the name felt familiar. Rumors, headlines, whispers of his rise to power in Eastern Europe. Some called him a hero, a stabilizer in a fractured region. Others warned he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. But here, in this vision, there was no question. Victor wasn't stabilizing anything. He was a force of chaos, his ambitions burning hotter than the fires surrounding him. The visions didn't stop. They came faster now, like a slideshow Sophia couldn't escape. Leaders sitting around long tables, their voices raised in heated arguments. Maps sprawled across desks, lines and arrows scrawled over countries. Sophia didn't need translations to understand the tension. Every move on those maps meant destruction for someone, somewhere. Sophia saw leaders blinded by greed, gambling with lives as if they were chips. Anger welled within her at their callousness. Then the vision stilled, and the presence's steady warmth anchored her. You alone can carry this truth. Sophia shook her head. She wanted to laugh, but the sound wouldn't come. Me? I'm just a reporter, she thought. I can't fix this. I can't even fix my Wi-Fi half the time. But the presence didn't waver. What you do with this knowledge will ripple outward. Humanity stands on the edge. You must act. Sophia felt her consciousness pull away, back toward the chaos of the physical world. The colors dimmed, the warmth receded, and she felt the weight of her body again. The presence's final words vibrated as her chest began to ache, her senses overwhelmed by a flood of pain and noise. What could one person do with such a burden? And how could Sophia, a journalist with no power or influence, possibly warn a world hurtling toward chaos? Sophia's eyes fluttered open to a blinding white light. For a split second, she wondered if she was still in the ethereal world. But then came the sharp beeping of machines and the muffled voices of people nearby. Nope, this was not heaven. It was a hospital. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and her chest ached as if someone had parked a truck on it. She tried to move, but every muscle screamed in protest. "She's awake!" a familiar voice shouted. Her sister Mia leaned into view, her eyes red and puffy. "Do you have any idea how scared we were? You were dead, Sophia. 3 minutes, no pulse." Her mom appeared next, clutching a tissue like it was a lifeline. "The doctors called it a miracle," Mia added, adding a mix of relief and frustration to her tone. Sophia blinked, taking it all in. Dead? 3 minutes? That explained the celestial detour. The doctor arrived shortly after, clipboard in hand and a no-nonsense expression. "You're lucky," he said matter-of-factly. "We don't usually see patients come back after that long. Your heart stopped, but we managed to revive you." He listed off medical jargon, but Sophia's mind was elsewhere. She wasn't thinking about heart monitors or IV drips. She was thinking about the glowing presence, the visions, the destruction she'd seen. It felt as real as the hospital bed she was lying in, but how could she even begin to explain that? When she finally spoke, her voice was raspy. "I saw something," she said hesitantly. Mia leaned closer. "What do you mean, something?" Sophia hesitated. How could she describe it without sounding crazy? She fumbled through the words, colors, light, chaos, a warning. But instead of awe or curiosity, her family exchanged uneasy glances. Her mom patted her hand. "Sweetheart, it's probably just the brain playing tricks. You've been through a lot." Her colleagues came by the next day. They were kinder, but just as skeptical. "You've got an imagination," one joked, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe this will inspire your next article." Sophia forced a laugh, but inside she felt like screaming. No one believed her. They all thought it was stress or trauma or some weird near-death hallucination. But it couldn't be dismissed. Sophia was certain of its truth. The visions didn't fade like dreams usually did. They stuck, clear and vivid, playing repeatedly in her mind. The dark skies, the collapsing cities. Victor Sergei's cold gaze. They haunted her at night, filling her sleep with fragmented scenes. During the day, they crept into her thoughts, making it impossible to focus. She started to doubt herself. Was it real? She whispered into the silence of her hospital room. But deep down, she already knew the answer. If no one believed her, How could she make them listen? And was it even possible to warn the world about a future they couldn't see? It took a few days for the fog to lift. Sophia had woken up in the hospital with little more than a vague sense of disorientation and an uncomfortable feeling in her chest. But slowly as the days passed, strange flashes of memory began to creep back in. It didn't happen all at once, more like bits and pieces that didn't quite fit together. At first it felt like a dream, or worse, like a bad movie. But the more she thought about it, the more real it seemed. The harder it was to ignore. It was the voice that haunted her first, soft, almost whispering in her ear, but strong enough to cut through the silence of that dark place. "It's not time." The words echoed in her mind, over and over, like a song stuck on repeat. But what did it mean? What did she need to know? The sense of urgency still gripped her chest, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down, though she couldn't understand why. There was something big, something huge that was coming, but she couldn't place it, couldn't make sense of it. The more she tried, the further it seemed to slip away. The images, the figure, and the feeling of dread. That one was harder to shake. It wasn't like the nervous unease you get when you're running late for a meeting. It was deeper than that, like an instinct, a primal warning, telling her that something was coming, something catastrophic. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, like an impending storm that you know is coming but can't see. It made her skin crawl. She didn't know if it was real or if her mind was just playing tricks on her. Was she just shaken by the accident? Or was it something more? For the first time in her life, Sophia found herself questioning what she believed. Before the crash, she had lived in a world of facts, proof, and cold, hard evidence. She had laughed off the stories of people who claimed to have seen the light at the end of the tunnel or heard voices from beyond. But now she was the one who had heard a voice, felt it even, and she couldn't explain it. The lines between reality and whatever she had experienced during her 3 minutes of death seemed to blur in her mind. As the days dragged on, she found herself constantly searching for answers. She couldn't stop thinking about the warning. She'd asked the doctors to ask her family, but no one seemed to have an answer. The medical staff was in awe of her recovery, but they chalked it up to modern medicine and her own will to survive. They told her she was lucky that she'd fought her way back, but Sophia wasn't so sure. If anything, it felt like she was running from something, a truth she couldn't yet understand. The voices in her head, the images that danced on the edges of her memory, they felt like pieces of a puzzle, but she didn't know how to fit them together. Her mind wandered to darker thoughts. She wondered if this was real, if the message was something important, something vital for everyone. She felt as though she might be meant to stop something, to warn people before it was too late. The thought made her stomach churn. She didn't strike anyone as the type of person to go around making wild claims. She was a journalist, a reporter who dealt in facts, who uncovered the stories that others wanted to hide. But now she was left with a mystery of her own, one that didn't fit into any neat little category. One afternoon, as she sat by the window in her hospital room, watching the traffic buzz below, she tried to focus on the details she could remember. The voice, the sense of urgency, the feeling of something waiting. It felt like a side effect of the accident, yet there was a nagging sense that she had truly glimpsed something no one else had. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes, trying to recall anything more. But the harder she tried, the more elusive it became. It was like trying to catch smoke with your bare hands. The flashes of the shadowy figure, the flashes of light, the cold grip of dread. They were there, but they felt farther away with every passing second. Still, there was one thing she couldn't shake. She knew deep down that this was not a hallucination. It felt too real. It felt like a message, a warning. Sophia sat up straighter, her thoughts racing. She had no answers. She had no clue what she was supposed to do with this knowledge, assuming it was even real. But one thing was certain. Something big was coming. The weight of the feeling settled in her chest again, heavier than before. She wanted to dismiss it. Maybe she could just forget about it all and go back to the life she knew, grabbing coffee, chasing stories, ignoring the strange, dark corner of her mind that seemed to scream at her for attention. But she couldn't. She couldn't ignore it. The warning was there, buried beneath her thoughts, and no matter how hard she tried to shove it away, it always resurfaced. One thing was for sure. Sophia Carter had been changed, and there was no going back. Whatever had happened in those 3 minutes, whatever had been whispered to her in the darkness, it was something she couldn't ignore. She just didn't know how it would all fit together. Not yet. But she would find out. She had to. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The more she tried to ignore it, the stronger the pull became. It wasn't just a memory. It felt like a warning. A nagging, gut-wrenching warning that she couldn't explain, but couldn't forget either. But the more she thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. A voice in the dark, a cryptic message from nowhere. She was a journalist, for heaven's sake. She was supposed to chase facts, not wander down a rabbit hole of superstitions and half-remembered dreams. Her logical mind hated what she was starting to believe. This wasn't how the world worked. She'd never been one for paranormal nonsense. Hell, she'd spent her career debunking myths and digging up the hard, cold truth. So why, after everything she'd seen and reported on, was she now wrestling with the idea that some kind of message from beyond was real? Was this thing she'd experienced more than just a side effect of the trauma? There were days when she'd convince herself it was nothing, just a hallucination brought on by the accident. Maybe it was a side effect of all the painkillers she'd been on. She'd try to push it out of her mind, focus on her recovery, on getting back to the world she understood, the world of facts and deadlines, where everything had a clear answer. But every time she did, the feeling would creep back like a shadow she couldn't outrun. And it went beyond just the message that haunted her. It was the urgency, the fear. Whatever she'd been told in that dark void felt important. Life or death important. No one would believe her if she spoke up. She could already imagine the skeptical chuckles of her colleagues. "Sophia, you sure you're okay? A little too much of the morphine, huh?" Her career would be over before it even truly began. Yet on the other hand, if she didn't speak up, if she didn't try to figure out what this was, how could she live with herself? The thought of ignoring it felt wrong, like closing her eyes to something that couldn't be unseen. What if that feeling of impending doom wasn't just in her head? What if she had to do something, anything, to stop it? She was already getting messages from her office, asking when she'd be ready to get back to work. The world didn't stop for near-death experiences, after all. There were stories to write, deadlines to meet, and the next big scoop waiting. She could already picture herself back at her desk, staring at her computer screen, pretending like the past few weeks hadn't happened. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was her boss again, checking in. "When do you think you'll be ready for the next assignment?" the text read. Sophia stared at the screen for a moment, then dropped her phone on the bed, sighing. She wasn't ready for anything. Not yet, but she knew deep down she couldn't ignore this. The message was still with her. It was waiting to be uncovered, like a locked box with no key. And as much as she hated to admit it, the reporter inside her was dying to know what was in it. It was a tug of war inside her chest. The part of her that longed to dive back into her normal life, work, friends, everything that felt safe and predictable, was at odds with the part of her that couldn't ignore the sense of wrongness that was gnawing at her. "Why can't this be simple?" she muttered to herself, staring out the window at the bustling city below. She'd always been the one with answers, the one who could write a story that people could believe. But this didn't fit into any neat little box dot. It came as something she could not research, investigate, or put into a report. It felt unlike any other story she'd ever covered, and that, more than anything, terrified her. The deeper she dug into it, the more it started to feel like the one story she couldn't escape. Sophia couldn't let it go. The more she tried to push the feeling away, the louder it became. The voice, the warning. It was like an itch she couldn't scratch. So she did what she always did when she didn't understand something. She researched. After all, she was a journalist. She needed proof, like always. She started diving into books, articles, and online forums about near-death experiences, hoping to make sense of what had happened to her. At first, it was like trying to drink from a fire hose. There were so many stories out there, some ordinary, some downright bizarre. But there were patterns. People spoke about seeing lights, feeling a sense of peace, meeting loved ones who had passed, and some even described conversations with mysterious figures. But the one thing that caught Sophia's attention was the recurring theme of warnings. People who had experienced death often spoke of feeling compelled to share what they had learned, to warn others about something they couldn't quite explain. So she did what any investigative journalist would do. She started calling people, spiritual leaders, NDE researchers, even others who had lived to tell the tale of their own brushes with death. She reached out to a man named Dr. Arthur Carrington, a leading expert in the field of near-death studies. He had written several books on the subject and had conducted thousands of interviews with people who claimed to have seen the other side. Dr. Carrington's voice on the phone was calm and reassuring, but it didn't ease her doubts. Many people who experience near-death events report that they receive some form of message, he explained. Sometimes it's personal, warnings for their health or relationships, but other times it's far more global. A sense of impending change, a collapse of society, perhaps, or a shift in human consciousness. His words sent a chill down her spine. Was this really the path she was about to follow? Sophia wasn't sure if she believed him yet, but she had to keep going. She needed answers. She started digging deeper into similar stories that aligned with the sensations she had felt during her own near-death experience. The more she read, the more the pieces started to click. There were warnings of environmental disasters, global economic crashes, and even societal upheavals. People who had died and come back claimed that they had seen flashes of these events, sometimes with terrifying clarity. One story stood out to her. A woman named Karen had fallen into a coma after a car accident and, during her NDE, saw what she described as a world on the edge of collapse. She'd spoken about hearing a voice telling her to warn others, a message about an impending catastrophe that couldn't be avoided. Karen had refused to speak out about it at first, afraid of being labeled crazy, but eventually she came forward, desperate to make sure the world was prepared for what was coming. Sophia felt a cold shiver run through her as she read the words, a world on the edge of collapse. It was exactly what she had felt during her brief time in the dark void. Only her memory of the warning had been so vague, so fragmented. But now, after weeks of research, it was beginning to feel like the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit. She reached out to more people, survivors, experts, even those who had ignored the warning signs in their own lives. Every conversation led to a deeper sense of urgency. It was all connected. It wasn't just a random string of events. Something was coming, something big, a global shift of some kind. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how little she truly knew. This was beyond a personal warning. This was bigger than anything she had ever encountered. She had always prided herself on chasing the truth. But now the truth felt elusive, like smoke slipping through her fingers. Every lead she followed only seemed to deepen the mystery. But Sophia didn't back down. She'd spent her career uncovering hard truths. She couldn't stop now, not when she was this close. The warning she had received hadn't been a figment of her imagination. She knew that much. The weight of it settled in her chest every day, and the more she researched, the more she felt like she was racing against time. She started making connections between the warning she had received and the growing signs of trouble she'd seen in the world. Political unrest, climate change, economic instability. Were these the things the voice had been warning her about? The more she thought about it, the clearer it became. The message wasn't just personal, it was a call to action. But Sophia didn't know what action to take. She couldn't shake the fear of ridicule, of being dismissed as a woman who had cracked under pressure. Her colleagues at the Sentinel were already aware that she had been in an accident, but none of them knew about the message. And yet, deep down, she knew she couldn't ignore it. She couldn't go back to her old life. Something was coming, something big. She had seen it, felt it, and now the only challenge was deciding what she could do about it. The feeling of urgency, the sense of impending disaster, it gnawed at her every time she tried to sleep. The world seemed to be heading towards some kind of collapse, or perhaps the experience had messed with her mind in ways she couldn't yet understand. She felt unsure, but she was starting to believe that maybe, just maybe, her purpose went beyond reporting the news. Perhaps she was meant to warn people, and so the hunt for the truth continued. Sophia's life had already been turned upside down once, but the truth she was now chasing, it would change everything. She had been chasing answers for weeks, digging through countless stories of near-death experiences, and something finally clicked. It wasn't just about her. This was bigger, much bigger. It was as if all the pieces she had collected over the past few days had come together in a flash, revealing a pattern she hadn't been able to see before. The warning she had received from the other side felt impersonal. It had nothing to do with her life or her choices. It was about all of humanity, and now she could hear the message loud and clear. The voice she had heard during her near-death experience had told her to pay attention. It had warned her that the world was heading in the wrong direction, that something catastrophic was on the horizon. It was as though she had been handed a blueprint of humanity's future, if humanity didn't change its course. The figure had spoken of a spiritual reckoning, a time when the world would face the consequences of its choices. And the more Sophia looked into it, the more she realized that what the voice had said was coming true. She had seen the signs. She had read about them in the papers and heard whispers of them in casual conversations: political unrest, climate change, economic instability. The pieces were all there if she cared to look. The warnings weren't just about one thing either. It wasn't just about the environment or politics or the economy. It was all of them, coming together like storm clouds on the horizon. And the scariest part, the storm was already brewing. People could feel it, even if they didn't understand what it meant. The world was on the edge of a massive change, and not going to be pretty. Sophia had always been a facts-first kind of person. She didn't have time for anything that couldn't be backed up with evidence. But this was different. The warning had come from a place beyond her understanding, and the more she looked into it, the more she realized that maybe there was truth to what she had experienced. She couldn't just ignore it anymore. If she did, it wouldn't just be her life she was risking, it would be everyone's. She was deeply focusing on what she learned in that brief moment between life and death. The details were still coming together, but Sophia was certain of one thing: the world needed to change, fast. People were living as though nothing could go wrong, as though the future was something that would take care of itself. But that couldn't be further from the truth. The voice had made that clear. The warning was urgent, so urgent in fact that Sophia felt a chill every time she thought about it. If people didn't change their ways, the world as they knew it would crumble. She thought about the state of the world: wars, political corruption, the growing wealth gap, and environmental destruction. The world was on the brink, and the warning wasn't just about one disaster. It was about everything: climate change, resource depletion, political instability. They were all connected. People weren't paying attention. Or maybe worse, they were ignoring it all because they didn't know how to fix it. It went beyond just the facts that bothered her. It was the feeling that came with it. There was a weight to this message, an emotional heaviness that Sophia couldn't shake. It didn't just serve as a warning, it called for action. She had to share it. She didn't know how or even if anyone would listen, but this message didn't belong in the shadows. It had to be told. But how could she, a journalist known for chasing cold, hard facts, tell people something so intangible, so huge, so abstract? The warning had been clear: change. People needed to change, but she wasn't sure how. She felt powerless to stand up and say, "This is what's coming." The world would think she was crazy, especially since she had been clinically dead for 3 minutes. No one would take her seriously. Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that she had been chosen for a reason. The warning wasn't just for her, it was for everyone. The message had come to her, and she had to share it. She didn't know how to make sense of it all, but it was as if the universe, or whatever had sent her back, had picked her as the messenger. There were times when she still questioned everything. Was it a hallucination, a product of her trauma? But no, deep down she knew. Her phone rang, breaking her train of thought. It was Dr. Carrington again, the near-death expert she had contacted weeks earlier. He had been a lifeline during her search for answers, and now he was calling her. "You're getting closer," he said, his voice low. I can feel it. You figured it out, haven't you? Sophia felt a shiver run through her. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. The message, he replied. It's not just personal. It's global. It's a warning about the path we're on. People don't want to hear it, but it's the truth. We're heading for a reckoning. The world's been out of balance for a long time, and now it's time to face the consequences. Sophia's mind raced. You know this. How? I've heard it before, many times. It's the same warning I've heard from others who've come back from the other side. They all say the same thing. Humanity has to change, or we're going to pay the price. The cold weight of the truth hit her again, harder this time. She wasn't alone in this. There were others who had come back with the same message, others who had experienced the same sense of urgency. And that thought was both a relief and a burden. Sophia sat down, her heart pounding in her chest. But what can we do? What's the solution? She asked, her voice cracking. Dr. Carrington's voice softened. The solution is simple. People have to wake up. They have to realize that the world isn't going to fix itself. We have to make a choice. We either change or we face the consequences. Sophia felt the weight of his words. It wasn't just about writing an article. It was about making sure the world saw the truth, no matter how hard it was to hear. She had to take action, even if it meant putting her career, her reputation, and her sanity on the line. The storm was coming, and whether people wanted to believe it or not, they would soon have to face the consequences. So what would Sophia do now? Would she stay silent, or would she stand up and share what she had learned? Could she convince the world to listen before it was too late? The answers were waiting, but time was running out. Sophia sat at her desk, the weight of the world pressing down on her shoulders. The flashing cursor on her computer screen seemed to mock her, blinking in rhythmic anticipation. She had the truth now, the warning, the message, everything. It was all there, in black and white. But publishing it felt like a risk. She knew what it could mean for her career, her reputation, and even her sanity. Every journalist has their moment, when the story is bigger than anything they could have imagined, but the consequences of sharing it could change everything. In the hours since Dr. Carrington's phone call, Sophia had been wrestling with herself. She was the truth seeker, the journalist who had built her career on digging up the uncomfortable, the inconvenient, the shocking truths. But this was something else entirely. She wasn't just reporting on a political scandal or a financial fraud. She was talking about the potential collapse of society. It was about a spiritual reckoning, a future where everything people took for granted could be ripped away in an instant. Telling the world felt like a daunting task. She feared being dismissed as just another hysterical woman who had been through something traumatic and was now seeing signs everywhere. The thought of their reaction weighed heavily on her, but the truth she carried refused to be ignored. It was a scary thought. The office where Sophia had worked for the past 5 years had a reputation for publishing hard-hitting investigative stories. But it was bigger than anything they had ever covered. She could already imagine the headlines. Journalist claims near-death vision, predicts apocalypse. And then what? The mocking, the skepticism, the ridicule. She could already hear her colleagues' voices in her head, trying to help her snap out of it, to pull her back to reality. But the warning was real. She knew it. She had felt it, had seen glimpses of it during her near-death experience. And now, the more she researched, the clearer it became. The signs were everywhere if you look closely enough. Climate change, political unrest, economic instability. The planet was in trouble and no one was listening. Sophia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. She was tired, mentally and physically drained, thinking about the right thing to do. She had never felt so torn. Every part of her said, publish it, tell the world. But another part of her hesitated. The voice in her head was filled with doubt. The fear that the world might not be ready for the truth gnawed at her. The thought that people might not be prepared to hear that everything they knew could collapse weighed heavily on her. She feared they might turn on her, laugh at her, and dismiss her as just another conspiracy theorist. The weight of those possibilities held her back. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her best friend. The message read, "I know you're still wrestling with this, but remember, you're a journalist. You've spent your career chasing the truth, no matter how hard it is. Don't back down now." Sophia stared at the screen, her heart pounding. She knew Clara was right. She had always believed in the power of the truth, even when it wasn't convenient. But this truth was different. This truth had the power to change everything, and the idea of standing up and shouting it from the rooftops terrified her. Then a flash of something, courage perhaps, ran through her. If not her, then who? She was the one who had received the warning. She was the one who knew the truth. The thought of staying silent felt unbearable. By holding back, she could be dooming the world to a fate it could have avoided. She couldn't live with that. Still, doubts were there. Maybe she was just overthinking things. Maybe she had let the trauma of her near-death experience cloud her judgment. Maybe it had all been a figment of her imagination, a vivid dream triggered by the accident. Maybe. But deep down, Sophia knew it was more than simple. There was something in her gut that told her she couldn't ignore it. A knock on her apartment door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find her brother, Marcus, standing there, looking serious. He had always been her sounding board, the person she turned to when the weight of the world seemed too heavy. "What's going on, Sophie?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "You've been acting off ever since you came back from the hospital." Sophia sighed, motioning for him to sit down. "I'm not sure I can explain it, Marcus," she admitted. "I had this experience, and now I have this message, a warning about the world, about how things are falling apart." Marcus raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "You mean like a conspiracy theory? Is this because of the accident? Maybe you're just, processing things. I mean, you did almost die." Sophia shook her head, frustration bubbling up inside her. "It's not like that. I know what I felt. I've been researching this for weeks, and it's real. The signs are there. The environment is breaking down, political systems are crumbling, and economies are failing. It's all connected, and we're on the edge of something major, something catastrophic." Her brother leaned back, his arms crossed. "You're serious, huh?" he said quietly. "So what do you want to do? Write a story about it?" Sophia hesitated. The words felt strange, almost foreign. "I don't know if I should. What if I'm wrong? What if the world thinks I'm crazy? I could lose everything. My career, my reputation. People would laugh at me." Marcus studied her for a long moment. "You're a journalist, Sophia. You've always gone after the truth, no matter how ugly or uncomfortable it was. If you believe this is real, then you have to report it. Don't let fear hold you back. You're stronger than that." Sophia looked down at her hands, trying to steady her breath. Her brother's words stung in the best possible way. She had spent her entire career chasing the truth, no matter how hard it was. But this truth was different. It wasn't about exposing corruption or solving a mystery. This was about a global awakening, or the lack of it. "What if I'm wrong?" she whispered. "What if people just see it as another delusion? What if they don't take me seriously?" "You won't know until you try," Marcus replied. "But you have to make the choice. Do you stand up for what you believe in, or do you stay silent and let the world spiral?" Sophia's mind raced. She had never felt so torn, so unsure of herself. But one thing was clear, she couldn't ignore this. The weight of this decision felt like a boulder pressing on her chest. The truth was sitting there in front of her, demanding to be shared. She had always believed in the power of journalism to change the world, to shed light on the darkest corners of society. But could she use that power to warn people about a disaster they didn't even know was coming? She stared at the blinking cursor again, and for a moment, time seemed to slow down. The words she would write next could change everything. But were the world's ears open enough to hear it? Sophia was unsure, but she knew she couldn't ignore it any longer. What would you do if you were in her shoes? Could you risk everything to tell the world the truth? Or would you keep quiet and let fear decide your future? Back at home, Sophia stared at the blinking cursor on her laptop screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure where to start. How do you explain something so vivid, so terrifying, and so unbelievable? She took a deep breath, remembering the presence's warmth and the vision's chilling clarity. Just tell the truth, she muttered to herself. So she did. For hours she wrote, pouring every detail onto the page. The glowing realm, the swirling colors, the voice that was not a voice, and the devastating images of chaos. She described Victor Sergei, the maps, the soldiers, and the warnings she'd been given. It's not just a story, she wrote. It's a wake-up call. When she finished, the headline almost wrote itself, "The warning I received in death." Sophia sent the article to the Global Post, a major outlet for which she occasionally freelanced. To her surprise, they published it almost immediately. Within hours, the piece went viral. But the first few hours were quiet. No flood of messages, no massive spike in views. But then slowly the reactions began to trickle in. Her phone buzzed with notifications, and her email inbox filled with messages. Some were supportive, others skeptical, and a few downright hostile. She had expected this, but still, seeing it all unfold, feeling its weight, was different from what she had imagined. Her colleague James had sent her a message almost immediately. He had called it absurd, a warning from beyond. He told her she was playing with fire and needed to be careful. James had always been the cynical one in the newsroom, but his concerns stung nonetheless. Then came the flood of social media responses. Some people hailed her as a visionary, applauding her courage to speak out. "Finally, someone's brave enough to warn us," one user tweeted. "Sophia's ahead of her time," another said. The messages from her supporters warmed her heart, but the doubts quickly crept in. They weren't the ones who had to live with the fallout. She was. Comments flooded in, ranging from, "Wow, this gave me chills," to "What kind of drugs was she on?" Critics called her delusional, claiming it was just a vivid near-death hallucination. But others believed her. Messages began pouring into her inbox, people thanking her, sharing their own near-death experiences, and saying her words felt eerily familiar. The buzz grew louder when global events started mirroring her vision. Reports of political unrest in Eastern Europe hit the headlines. Environmental disasters, a massive flood in Venice, and wildfires raging across Australia dominated the news cycle. And then among the flood of messages Sophia received, one stood out. It was from someone claiming to work in intelligence. "What you described," the message read, "aligns with classified information I can't discuss here. Be careful who you trust." Sophia's heart raced as she read it. Was this person legit? And if so, what did they know that she didn't? It was one thing to publish a standard investigative piece, but this felt different. She had shared something deeply personal, something that had shaken her to her core. And now people were debating whether she had lost her grip on reality. As the days passed, the story spread. News outlets from around the world began picking it up. Some gave it serious attention, while others treated it like a sideshow. There were interviews, phone calls from reporters asking for more details. Could it really be true, they asked. What if she's right? But the more people asked, the more it felt like the world was watching her, waiting to see how she would react. Sophia found herself in the eye of a storm she hadn't anticipated. Her credibility as a journalist was on the line. But she had made her decision and couldn't back down now. She had to stand by her story, even if it meant risking everything. Yet in the back of her mind, a nagging fear lingered. The possibility that she might have gotten it wrong unsettled her. One evening, as she sat at her kitchen table, scrolling through the endless comments, her phone rang. It was her mentor, Dr. Arthur Carrington. She hadn't heard from him since the phone call that had set everything in motion. "Hello?" she answered, her voice unsure. "Sophia," he said, his tone serious. "I've been following the fallout. You did the right thing, but brace yourself. The truth you're telling people isn't easy to swallow. You'll be questioned, criticized, and even mocked. But in time, people will see that you weren't wrong. The question is, can you handle the storm ahead?" Sophia swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. "I don't know, doctor. I thought I was prepared, but it's a lot harder than I imagined." "I know, but remember why you did it? You didn't speak out for the fame or the glory. You spoke out because you believe this warning is real. And you're not alone. There are others out there who've had similar experiences. Stay strong. She sat silently for a moment, the reality of her situation sinking in. Her heart raced with uncertainty, but Dr. Carrington's words gave her a sense of clarity. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about the message, the warning, the truth that needed to be heard. But the next few days only brought more tension. As the media storm around her story grew, Sophia found herself at the center of a debate that she hadn't fully anticipated. Some people were now starting to look for patterns in the world, questioning the systems they had always trusted. Could climate change be accelerating faster than expected? Was the political instability around the world a sign of something more? Was there something she was trying to tell them that no one had seen? On the flip side, there were those who continued to call her crazy. The rational voices mocked her, insisting that her near-death experience was just a psychological anomaly, nothing more. The more she read, the more she felt like she was walking a fine line. If this truly was a message, then why couldn't the world see it too? She spent sleepless nights reflecting on her transformation. She had started this journey as a skeptic, a journalist who relied on hard facts and cold logic. But now here she was, someone who had experienced something beyond the logical realm. Was she still the same person she had been before? The rational, objective reporter? Or had she crossed a line, stepping into a world where logic couldn't always explain what she had seen and felt? Despite the backlash, something amazing started to happen. More and more people began reaching out, sharing their own experiences and their own warnings. Some had seen visions, others had felt a deep sense of foreboding. There were even whispers that a growing number of scientists and experts were quietly beginning to connect the dots, wondering if the impending disaster Sophia had warned about was something they should be taking more seriously. As the weeks went by, the initial media storm died down, but Sophia's message didn't. It lingered in small discussions, in private conversations, and even in online forums where people debated the possibility of change. Sophia realized more than ever that she had done something bigger than just writing a story. She had started a conversation, a global one. But as the months passed and the world didn't immediately collapse as she had warned, some of the initial fervor faded. The skeptics returned to their normal lives. The supporters, though fewer now, remained steadfast. Sophia wasn't sure if the disaster she had predicted would ever come to pass. But one thing was clear. She couldn't go back to the person she had been before. She had seen the world differently now. She had shared a message that had resonated with some, and for that, she could never regret her decision. So was she just a woman who had seen a glimpse of the future? Or had she started something bigger? One thing was certain. Sophia's life had changed forever. Whether the world was ready or not, she had warned them. And for better or worse, she had become part of a story much larger than herself. Sophia felt both vindicated and overwhelmed. People were starting to listen, but was it enough? And how much more could she uncover before it was too late? Could one article really change anything? Or was this just the beginning of something far bigger than Sophia ever imagined, sparking a global change? Sophia didn't plan on becoming a global voice for change. She just wanted people to listen. But the more she spoke, the more people joined her cause. One of them was Dr. Elena Monroe, a peace activist known for her sharp wit and even sharper strategies. Dr. Monroe didn't just believe Sophia's story, she saw its potential. "You've got something they can't ignore," Elena told her one evening over a Zoom call. "Now let's make it impossible for them to look away." Together they launched a global campaign. Their message was simple. The world was at a breaking point. It was about everything: climate disasters, growing inequality, and leaders choosing power over people. They started small: interviews, podcasts, and social media posts. But soon the campaign snowballed into something bigger. People began organizing rallies, signing petitions, and demanding action from their governments. Sophia wasn't just speaking anymore, she was learning. Elena taught her the ropes of activism, navigating skepticism, dealing with opposition, and staying focused. "You'll face a lot of backlash," Elena warned her. "But if we stay persistent, the right people will listen." And they did. Journalists, activists, and even a few politicians began quoting Sophia's articles and speeches. She was no longer just the girl with a vision. She was becoming a symbol of hope. That chance came unexpectedly. An invitation arrived for Sophia to speak at a high-level global summit. World leaders and diplomats were all there. The idea of standing in front of such prominent... She spoke with raw honesty, recounting the visions of destruction and chaos she had seen. Sophia described the suffering, the environmental collapse, and the choices that could still be made to prevent such a future. Her words starkly contrast the path humanity was on and the better world they could strive for. The room hung on her every word, the silence afterward speaking louder than applause ever could. Her call for unity and action reverberated far beyond that room. Her story sparked conversations that transcended borders. Governments began opening dialogues, grassroots movements gained momentum, and people everywhere started seeing their role in shaping a better future. One woman's warning became a global vision for peace, resilience, and hope. Sophia's journey started with an accident, but it became a warning for the world, a call to action when humanity needed it most. But did her message reach the right ears? Could one vision truly change the course of history? Let us know your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire and challenge us all.